All right. Hi, guys. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to our part two on trans issues and stigmatization in society. Um, Last episode, we talked a lot about trans media representation, and I'd love to move into more topics regarding that, especially for trans people in sports and politics. So, if anyone else wants to start off, feel free to, but otherwise, I can start us off.
Um, okay. I did have something I want to say that I don't really think I got to say in the last episode, and it's not super political, but it doesn't really have to do with really representate like media representation. It kind of actually has to do with like issues within the LGBT community itself. Because I think one thing I wanted to say is that for being bisexual, a lot of people think that if you're bisexual, somehow you're, or like they paint being bisexual somehow being transphobic, or like some people think that you can't be bisexual and then
Oh,
like
yeah.
trans people. And that's like an inherent way of saying that trans people don't exist, and also like invalidating both bisexuality and trans people. And I'm like, but do you guys not understand the whole point of being trans is that you are not whatever gender you were, that whatever gender before, like you have transitioned to a new gender and that is your gender. It's not like being transgender is not a whole separate gender in itself. It's just a term that for those people. I don't know. It's just something that really bugs me, and I want to bring up.
They just like put it in like a different category, and like by putting it in a completely different, it's just different, you know. It's like, yeah, men and women, but like different, and the different is often like portrayed as being like negative, or just
it's like the super straight thing all over again. You know, super straight thing.
No, actually, I think it's a little different from super straight thing.
I've never actually heard of it.
So super straight is a phenomenon that started, I think, a few years ago. It may have been 1 year ago. I don't have any sense of time.
I think it really came into traction during COVID years, like 2020 and 2021. It really came to light.
And so basically, it's this thing where a bunch of straight people are like, oh, I am straight and I would never date a trans person, therefore I am super straight.
I've seen like trends like that on like Instagram.
And so they're like, oh my god, I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community too.
Girl, no, you're not.
No, they're trying. They're trying so hard, bro.
They're trying way too hard. Like, you can be an ally, but not really. They're like, well, technically, heterosexuality and cisgender is part of like the LGBTQ spectrum too. It's also, and I'm like, yeah, well, you know, technically we are invalidating your like straightness and your like cisgenderness. It's just that, you know, just because you're saying that, you know, you can't invalidate like an issue that's more pressing.
Like, I'm sorry,
I don't think we're invalidating.
Yeah, we're not invalidating anything. Yeah. They're like, oh my god, you guys don't like pay attention to straight people anymore or something. It's honestly
people just really want to be oppressed these days.
Yeah, this straight people have the rights that LGBTQ people had to fight for. So I'm sorry they don't get a parade, but I think fighting for your civil rights deserves a parade.
No, because straight people, they are not illegal in any country. So they cannot be put to the death penalty in any country based on their sexuality.
Look, the issue I have with the whole illegal in another country argument, this has nothing to do with like the fact that it is there. It's just that people use it so often to look at third world countries in a bad light. You know?
That's actually it's a lot.
It's not like we're doing anything like
third world countries.
America's doing any better.
Countries like have that issue.
Yeah, and it's not like America's doing any better. Like clearly,
we're reverting ourselves right now.
And especially with like the recent like overturning of Roe v. Wade, that actually even might mean that they might overturn the same decision that was used to legalize same-sex marriage. So like clearly we are heading in the right
Thomas come through, I guess.
No, it's because they overturned Roe v. Wade by like disregarding the right to privacy for women, so that can actually overturn more than just like same-sex marriage.
Because they broke a judicial precedent.
They
overturn a like.
Y'all, I just have to add this about the Roe v. Wade stuff. I don't want it to be like people to misinterpret what we're saying, because a lot of people will point to Justice Alito's majority decision statement where he's like, we'll make sure that Roe v. Wade is like a single issue decision and we're not going to consider other like constitutional rights covered by the privacy law. But Justice Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion, which means he agreed with the majority opinion, but he had a different interpretation of it, was like, we can use this privacy law to reconsider cases like Obergefell and Griswold, etc., banning or allowing contraception.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to mention. Like, they're not going to stop at just banning abortions. They're going to start banning birth control. They're going to start banning condoms. They just want to force women back into the traditional role of just being like barefoot, naked, and pregnant, as one of my teachers likes to say. So they just want to revert back to that version of women. They aren't going to stop at just abortions. They're not actually fighting for the unborn fetus. They don't have that. They don't have that future in mind.
If they were fighting for children,
they'd have a future where they're still in power in mind.
You know, but if they were fighting for the children, they'd be fighting for trans children to have better access to healthcare. They'd be fighting for more gun control so Uvalde doesn't happen again. I'm sorry.
Because they passed laws protecting guns just weeks after Uvalde happened. But one thing I would like to mention is we were talking about like bisexuality a bit earlier, but I think someone explained it to me like really well, how it was more like a binary, where like you're attracted to people of the same gender and also people that are not the same gender, so like agender. So that could include transgender people and cisgender people.
No, yes, okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to bring up, because that's exactly the definition that I think a lot of people get confused about, is that it's not exclusive. Like, we don't exclude people. We don't, like, no one cares about that stuff.
Yeah, so like seen through like a cisgender like point of view, that's why it appears only like that, and not like this more broader definition that truly like shows the binary nature of being bisexual.
Yeah, no, actually, I'd like to add a very interesting fact about that, because a lot of people have this debate over bi versus pan. And like bi people only like men and women, and pan people like everybody. But I feel like that those definitions are depending on the person who uses to identify with them, right? Because you can't categorize sexuality based off of these umbrella terms. Even as hard as you try, you can try. And it may help people be part of a community, but you're not limited to a definition set by a person if that's the term you feel like best defines you. Because as far as I'm aware, bisexuality means liking two or more genders, and pansexuality means liking people despite their gender.
Yeah, I believe like bisexuality is more like considering oh wait, actually, yeah, you just said it. I think just pan people just don't care about gender at all, but for bi people, there's like a spectrum for their gender.
Yes, anyway. Okay, thank you for bringing that up, because as a bi person, as like a person who's by myself, like not okay, not by myself,
by yourself.
Only I'm not buying it.
In the chat, bro.
Okay, but like, thank you, because like that's always how I've viewed it. Like, it's not necessarily that it's like only men and women. It's a spectrum of people, and you have a preference, but it doesn't mean that you're only limited to those two genders. Pansexuality is just you don't really care about gender at all. You just like people.
Okay, and so that could be getting on track a little bit. Sorry, I think we got a little off track, but our main focus should be trans people right now. I would like to talk about Ben Shapiro.
Go for it.
He has been very outspoken about issues regarding trans people, and in particular, he likes to use the incorrect pronouns for people that change their pronouns or change their names. And I think that is super disrespectful, because pronouns is not something that is hard to understand. It's basically saying like, okay, so like Isha, oh no, actually Samshita. Your name right now is Samshita, right? But later on, you might feel like, oh, actually, I prefer to go by like Sam's, or Sam's. So you tell everyone that, oh, I prefer Sam's now. The common decent thing to do is to respect that. It's not hard to understand why someone would want to change it. They just feel like changing it. So I think
and
connecting could I finish first? I think connecting the idea of pronouns to like names as something that really does identify you can help people understand it more. So the issue about pronouns and issue about transgender and cisgender differences, it can just be resolved just by understanding that like, oh, pronouns is something that identifies you. So like adding pronouns and like say your job status, or like even in your schools, like people like ask for your pronouns in like club settings or even professional settings. That'll be like a great way to revert the like discrimination against people that openly use their pronouns versus people that don't and think like pronouns are dumb.
So honestly, not respecting a person's pronoun, like I get like the first time like someone changes their pronoun, it takes a little bit of like getting used to because you're not used to calling them by those pronouns. I get that, but if you keep making repeated mistakes after time and time again, it really shows the ignorance on your part that you're just not willing to put in the effort to actually respect and honor their identity. And it maybe even come out of like a stubbornness to just like simply accept who they are, which is very, very evident of like you being against their identity.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to raise a concern for that because again, there is that period, that learning curve, but it also is really hard to relearn the way you associate a name or something like that with somebody. Of course, it's common courtesy to do your best to try, but at least with most of the trans people I'm friends with, they understand that there is a learning curve. And I think it's really the intention behind
the intention is what matters. Like
rather than because if you're intentionally messing up somebody's pronouns, then that's awful. Why would you do that to somebody if their pronouns aren't harming you? Why would you?
Yeah, there's
like
a clear
you make a
difference
mistake and then you
maliciousness
realize and you
and
correct yourself. I understand,
Yeah.
But if somebody's putting their gosh darn hardest into learning all these new terms for all these new things for somebody, I feel like with their mistakes, they should be held accountable for them, but I don't think they should be like aggressively bashed for it.
No, I agree because I have friends who are trans or like even or don't even like or like they identify as like non-binary, and some people I know who change their name, and even sometimes them because I'm so used to referring to them in one specific way. Even though I will always try my best to call them by whatever they prefer, even sometimes I accidentally slip up, and I don't do it with a harmful intent. So I think intent is what matters. And I do have one more point to make, but I think Rohini had something to say, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I just want to say that like that's why I wanted to reiterate the importance of like teaching about this community and all parts of it, pronouns, gender, fluidness, and all that stuff at an early age. Like it's not inappropriate to learn about. It's something that will affect a large part of our population, and we can't just ignore it anymore. I think just educating about that at a younger age would be a great step in solving the current problems we face with like lawmakers and media representation, all that stuff, and like the misrepresentation of our community. So I think fighting for that is something that we have to do as a community, else we're just going to be stuck in the same position where we're being discriminated against and we can't do anything about it. So anyways, Isha, you can.
Okay, so this is a kind of a new topic I want to bring up, but I think it's something that's kind of prominent. So I know that we've been talking about, especially how in the States, and especially I know we kind of like concentrate in Texas, of like how Texas has made laws against saying that, telling people like it's okay to out people if they're trans, and then counting being like supporting your kid for being trans if they're a minor as child abuse. But I would like to bring up conversion therapy, which is actually child abuse.
Yeah.
So for anybody who doesn't know what conversion therapy is, it's basically a very harmful way of using like spiritual religious practices to kind of force a person to be cisgender and straight if they come out as either being like LGBT, regardless of either if they change like their gender or if they have a different sexuality other than being heterosexual. And it's an extremely harmful practice, yet in the States, majority of the states in the US have not banned conversion therapy. And I just love how hypocritical Texas is for being like, we only have the kids' best intent in mind when they try to pass laws for counting helping trans kids as being child abuse, yet they still have nothing actually like banning actual abusive practices.
The way they vice president.
Could I interject something really quickly about one really concerning thing about this conversion therapy is like for the men that are forced into it, usually the gay or bi or pan men, they oftentimes are like forced to have like intimate relationships with a woman. So it's basically just sexually harassing them in these camps. But again, the lack of like acknowledgement that men can be raped as well is just astounding because we just ignore that has happened for years, and it can even continue to happen to this day because there's just no news reports about this stuff. Like a trans person can get murdered and it will not be reported in our daily news, but if like a trans person just goes and like says like wearing a shirt saying like, oh, I'm trans at their work office, and they get fired for it, then like there'll be news outlets like reporting on it, supporting them getting fired for it, saying like, oh, you shouldn't be advocating for your gender everywhere, you don't have to force it on us. But we're just ignoring all of this discrimination. And I think it's just so sad It's just such a sad thing that's still happening today.
I'd also like to point out like a little discrepancy between how people treat minority groups when they speak out about it or when they commit or like a crime or something like that versus how people subject like the majority. So say it's this person, I don't know, does something really bad like steal or something like that. Most of the news media will be like, oh, it's fine, they're a young kid. They'll have to, especially if they're a white.
Yeah, especially if they're white.
Specifically man-child.
Man-child.
Anyway, specifically if they're white, cis, straight, able-bodied child, specifically a boy. People are so quick to be like, oh, they're just troubled, they'll learn, you shouldn't waste their future now. But the minute a trans kid or somebody who's not outside of that white, cis, straight boy range does something like that, they're like, oh, well, I guess the entire minority group is defunct. Got to throw them all out.
Yeah, it's like they take one issue, like one bad thing that a person does that is like completely unrelated to their like sexual orientation or their gender, and they use that to make a generalization on the entire group. And that annoys me because for white people, they'll just be like, oh, yeah, that one white boy, he just had a hard childhood, you know? It's not just
he's
all white
mentally
people.
ill.
But at the same time, if a black kid does it, they'll be like, oh, it's the black kid's fault. It's because he's black. That's how the community is. That's what people will be saying. And then again, regarding their sexual orientation, they'll say like, oh, it's a that type person type of thing. So I think that's just, it's such a disgusting stereotype, let's be honest. And it just allows like the majority to get away with a lot of bad stuff. And like it continues to suppress a lot of people.
The list of double standards and hypocrisy does it, and honestly, it's
it's really a double standard. If we're done with this topic, I would love to move into trans people in sports, because I know we all have a lot of opinions on that. I'd just like to start off by like acknowledging that there is like, I researched this recently, but in a military context regarding people that did like female to male or male to female transformations regarding their surgery, like for male to female, they showed like obvious signs of like superiority in like strength and running and fitness up to 2 years after taking like hormone therapy and surgery change and like just like the entire transition process, you know. So they showed that those like advantages up to 2 years, but after those 2 years, I think it kind of just leveled out and they were practically equal, or like they were really close, that there was like no statistical difference. So but then I also read that this is like strictly in a military context, so it's not even related to sports. And the thing is, there's so little data on trans people in sports, or like people that want to get data on trans people normally in life, that it's just like, we can't make any assumptions right now. We can't like properly say that, oh, trans people have an advantage or a disadvantage in sports, because we don't have the data to prove that. And I think we need more data.
You know what I think is honestly kind of frustrating is that whenever you see like conservative backlash for like transgenders in sports, they always bring up, you know, the very evident physical differences, which, you know, to a certain extent, you know, men and women do have different physical capabilities. It's only natural. But it's like they say that in order for the transgender people to participate in sports and make it so that like both just cisgender and transgender, regardless of like, you know, what gender, have a very like equal advantage and a fair playing field, then transgender people should have like transitioned by the time they're teenager. But then when kids, you know, make up their, like young kids, even like around the age of 10, make up their idea, you know, like I'm transgender, I don't feel comfortable in my own gender, I feel I was meant to be in like some other gender, right? And when they go to do that, and even at, like in their teen years, right, you know, like people our age, you know, they're like, we're transgender, we don't feel, you know, secure in this gender. They want to go do that. The same people who say that, you know, in order for transgender to like be able to participate in sports, like they need to have transitioned before they were a teenager, they're the same people who oppose it. Now say, you know, child abuse, you know, they're not in their right mind to do it, it messes up, you know, it's not safe or something, you know. Okay. So it's like, again, hypocrisy.
there's 2 points I'd like to bring up here. And the first I'd like to say is that whenever people are making the argument against trans people in sports, they always are quick to mention the advantage that male to female transgender people would have. However, they don't ever talk about trans men who do have a disadvantage if they compete in men's sports.
Exactly. Like they just refuse to talk about the disadvantages of trans people face.
Yeah. And another thing I'd like to mention is, as you were mentioning about a lot of people pressing for legislation or about transgender individuals transitioning during their teen years. And I'd like to talk about a thing called puberty blockers.
Oh yeah, I researched that too. I wanted to mention that. I was like dying to mention.
So I watch a YouTuber called Jamie Dodger. They're a trans man. And
I know him. I love him.
Yeah, you know him? Yeah.
He's so cool.
I know. Right. And him and his fiance are
they're so cute. There's a couple goals.
Doesn't matter. So I wanted to talk about puberty blockers really quickly, because I know a lot of people are considering passing legislation to ban puberty blockers. And Rohini, if you have something to say, please go ahead.
Okay. No, you can talk about your puberty blockers first, and I'll just like fill in the information I know about it, because I researched it so much last night. Like I have so much to say. But you go first.
Yeah, no, because a lot of people are pushing for legislation that doesn't allow it until you're after, or it doesn't allow it because they think, you know, it messes with teenage hormones or whatever. But all it does is like let you experience puberty at a later date, especially because puberty is such a hard time for transgender people in particular, because it's a time where your body is changing and you're becoming your body's transitioning into your assigned gender, which could be very uncomfortable for people who don't identify with that. It's a really tough time, and it honestly leads to a lot of mental health issues for transgender individuals, which is why a lot of them believe that puberty blockers and other medication like that is very beneficial for them during their teenage years. But unfortunately, a lot of people either don't have access to them, it's too long, or people are very opposed to it. Go ahead.
I'm so glad you mentioned this, but puberty blockers are like recommended to take until like the age of 14, where it has like negative effects on your bone growth. But before that, it's like relatively harmless to take. It just stalls the puberty that your body does, like say starting your period, building your body mass, breast development, and it's such things like that affects like people so much. Like one thing I like to mention is how like trans men, they still have to suffer with their periods, and that's like such a big issue for them because it's so debilitating for their gender identity and makes them feel like less of a man, even though they've done everything they can. But because they started transitioning after puberty, even if they did at the earliest date they could, like 16 and above, you can start your hormone therapy, where you have to be older to do your surgeries. But even then, they still have to deal with their periods, and they struggle to find a community to talk about their menstruation with, because trans men just aren't accepted. Like right now in the current menstruation communities, we just refuse to talk about trans men and the issues that they face. And that's like an entirely different topic, but we have to really focus on integrating trans men into our conversations, because all these abortion laws and these contraception laws, they're going to affect trans men as well. And I would like to say it would affect them more than it will affect cisgender women, because as a trans man, you feel like a man, you know, you're not supposed to get pregnant, but say that you do get pregnant and you have no way of like stopping that pregnancy from happening anymore. It can be so harmful for your mental health, for how you treat your child when they're born, for like, it can just be so harmful in general. But anyways.
Of course, they are trans men who do want to get pregnant. I know a couple.
Oh yeah, of course. There's exceptions all the time.
There's a couple of trans straight passing trans couples that that occur when the trans man is carrying the child instead of the trans woman, because
I have so much respect for those relationships, because they can like truly understand the struggles that other people go through. Okay, anyway, talking about like the puberty blockers, I think it would be like, it's like insane how amazingly beneficial this can be, because like for people that it's like not a slow process or like a unsure process that you decide that you're trans. It's like something that takes years of you yourself to process, to recognize, And then even after that, you have to go through like years of therapy and confirmation with the psychiatrist and so much other stuff to even start hormone therapy or start to get surgeries. So doing this like puberty blocker, it's just like an injection. It just stops your puberty from happening. It doesn't, I believe it does not affect your mental development greatly. It only focuses on.
I mean, I was reading over like the side effects, and most of them just appear to be like physical, like
yeah, it's just like physical development that it stops.
Flashes. But I mean, yeah, there can be like mental effects too. But I feel like this could like greatly impact like how a person feels about their identity.
Yeah, and also
yes, go ahead.
Yeah, also this could solve the issue of like trans people in sports, because if they start like taking these puberty blockers and then once they like get through the therapy sessions and the psychiatric sessions and like confirm that they are actually trans, because apparently you need like more confirmation to change your gender than it is to get a gun. But anyways, like once they confirm that, they can start taking their hormones at like pre-puberty, like pre their puberty era. And then they can start their puberty and they can actually like become closer to the gender that they confirm with. And that could be so helpful to helping them in sports, because then they don't really have that advantage of like a male puberty when they're like identifying as female, because they went through the female version of puberty as to the extent that they can, of course. And that can help with their like the body mass issue or even the height issue that a lot of people have with like trans men in sports and trans women in sports. So I think like we just have to focus on embracing these new types of medicine, because it can solve so many issues that people have if we just embrace it and understand that our children aren't making these decisions randomly, but it's something that they had to come to terms with themselves through extensive like inner thought processes and all that stuff.
And I think
don't realize like what a big decision that is. You're essentially changing a major part of your identity.
Yeah.
And it's not like a very easy process.
Yeah, and like so few people, there's only like 1 to 3% of trans people that regret their transition. So it's not like a large amount of people regret it. Like most people are happy that they did and they wish they could do it earlier. That's what the majority view is.
I believe Isha had
I think that like another thing that like always just gets me is that instead of trying to make life more difficult for trans people by like continually telling them that you can't compete in a certain sport because of these factors of your body, why don't, instead of like trying to shut them away from this, try opening up new avenues so that they can participate in this, which then just kind of goes back to the whole social stigma around trans people. And another thing that I'd also wanted to bring up when Noreen, you were talking about puberty blockers and all, it's also about people who are also non-binary, because I know that okay, I think non-binary is itself is also such like a like confusing term for some people, because some people are like, because it often gets passed off as you don't have a gender, but that's not necessarily.
Yeah, I find that people find it like saying that non-binary people don't have a gender is the easiest way to explain it to people that only believe in the binary. Like I myself made that mistake.
That's not, I don't feel like that's like the right way to go about it, because I think
you need to understand that it's a term for no gender.
Yeah, no, because then that's on the spectrum. Like there's a whole spectrum of like labels, and there are people who identify as non-binary but still like to present more with more feminine features or like with more masculine features.
Yeah, it's really a spectrum.
There's really a whole spectrum. I think like a lot of people just don't understand that, and it's really frustrating, I think, to see, for especially again for non-binary people, when they're excluded from these conversations about having periods, about having to having binders or needing puberty blockers when they're younger, just so that they can feel more comfortable with their body and with themselves. But then people set it out to ostracize them because they think that they're being pressured by society or there's something wrong with them, but there's not. They're just trying to feel more comfortable in their own bodies, and yet for some reason there are people in society who feel the need to infringe on that. And instead of trying to help these people feel comfortable, they're just like, oh, no, we're going to make it so it's more difficult for you to like get access to this. And
honestly, the worst part is like this issue doesn't even affect you. Okay, no one's asking you to change. Just support someone when they want to change,
Yeah,
I think I think a large issue that could be playing into this is, how do I explain this? It's the fact that, what was it? So all these medications and stuff like that, people are assuming that young kids and young teenagers are going to be going through like surgery and stuff like that, or be going through hormone therapy that's permanent. But they
hormone
don't realize
therapy,
the
actually,
age limitation. Yeah.
That's a misconception because most of hormone therapy is actually reversible once you stop taking that hormone or start taking, like, say you're on T, then you start taking estrogen instead. That can like reverse the effects of the hormone therapy. So a lot of it is actually reversible. So I think that's just an unnecessary fear that a lot of people have.
No, I think a lot of people are thinking that kids are starting like, I mean, because even if hormone therapy doesn't lead to like permanent changes, there still are age limitations. There are age restrictions in place already. And honestly, I feel like the politicians and the people making the policies surrounding transgender healthcare actually have to talk to healthcare professionals before they make the decisions themselves, because they don't know what healthcare professionals need, nor do they know what could be possibly necessary in order for a person to be fully fulfilled and happy, pursue their happiness. They have a right to happiness in the Constitution, and they're being denied that right because of policies that force them to be something that they're not.
Yeah, I think we could really come to a consensus that we truly do need more advances in like educating people about this, like puberty blockers, the true benefits that can have, the new medicine that can help trans people, and just educating people on trans people itself. Like integrating it into school education would be amazing. And that can help fix the issues that we face in politics with discrimination. But yeah, I think that's about all the time we have today. So thank you guys for coming to share your thoughts about this topic. I'm really happy we got to get like 2 episodes done. We had so much to say. If you guys have any final thoughts, just you guys can say now, else we can wrap it up.
No, I think that's it for today. I just want to say happy Pride to everybody.
Yes,
happy Pride, everybody.
Happy Pride, everybody.
Yes, thank you for watching, whoever is watching our episode 3 of our podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, like our video, hit the notification bell. We will like you very much if you do that.
We will give you heart.
Yeah, we will personally deliver our hearts.
Forever in our hearts.
Yes. All right. Thank you guys for watching. All right, bye.